In this case, a closet played a key role, a story so unusual that it is hard to find anything similar. More than 100 years ago, this house was the scene of a mysterious event, the details of which still send chills down your spine. The home had been ransacked, Fred was shot, and his wife was locked inside a closet from which she could not escape on her own. Police officers analyzed the traces left by the attackers and examined possible clues. Even so, it was only years later that they discovered a hidden room, one whose existence had long been forgotten. This overlooked detail turned out to be the key to solving the mystery. An incredible story, full of twists, action, and shocking discoveries, and it really happened. Dark File. Deadly good stories. Late in the evening of August 22, 1922, the peace of the residents in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles was shattered. Something disturbing had happened in one of the houses. Several people heard the sound of a gunshot, while others noticed someone leaving the apartment building shortly afterward. The incident was reported to the police. Moments later, several officers arrived at the scene. When they knocked on Mr. and Mrs. Oesterreich's door, no one answered. They tried the handle. It was unlocked. So they stepped inside. As they moved toward the living room, they were met with chaos. The room looked as if a hurricane had swept through it. Furniture was overturned, and items that had likely been in drawers and cabinets were now scattered across the floor. Lying nearby was an unconscious man. As the officers approached, they quickly realized he was already dead. Gunshot wounds were visible on his chest and head, from which liters of blood had flowed. The deceased man was fashionably and elegantly dressed, matching the tastefully decorated home. People in the area knew Fred Oesterreich as the wealthy owner of a textile plant, a man who inspired both admiration and envy. Could jealousy have pushed someone to commit this brutal act? Investigators couldn't ignore the possibility. The officers searched the other rooms. Fred had a wife, but there was no sign of Wahlberga in the living room. They checked the kitchen, bathroom, and bedrooms. When they entered the master bedroom, they heard a cry. It was coming from the closet. They opened the door and saw a terrified middle-aged woman. It was the deceased's wife. As she later recounted, she had been locked inside for several hours. She testified that she and her husband had attended a party with friends that evening. When they returned home, she went to hang up her clothes in the spacious closet. As soon as she stepped inside, someone shoved her in and quickly shut the door. Since she had her back to the entrance, she couldn't see who had trapped her. At first, she assumed it was her husband. Who else could it be? They lived alone. Maybe Fred had been caught off guard and wanted to play a silly prank on her. But when she called out to him, he didn't answer. Moments later, she heard several gunshots. Panic set in. Their house had been targeted for burglary before. They were wealthy. They lived in an elegant home. Perhaps someone had chosen them as a target again. Her husband never came to release her. She feared the worst, that he had been harmed. She took the news of her husband's death badly. They had been married for more than 20 years. Both were originally from Germany, but had spent most of their lives in the United States, growing up in Milwaukee. Fred's father had established a textile business there, which he later entrusted to his son. Dolly was a teenager when she started working at the company. A few years later, she caught the attention of her future husband. The girl, 3 years his junior, was considered extremely attractive. In addition, people admired her for her affable personality and kind heart. At 17, she became Mrs. Oesterreich. She later gave birth to a son, who quickly became the apple of his parents' eye. Unfortunately, the boy died at a young age. The loss devastated both mother and father. Despite the passage of time, they never fully came to terms with it. Until 1918, they lived in Milwaukee. However, shortly before the end of World War I, they moved to sunny California, settling in a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles. Fred opened a new business, and together with his wife, he focused on running it. Dolly poured her motherly affection onto others, especially the young employees at the plant. She cared for them as if they were her own children, ensuring they were treated well and shielding them from her husband's wrath. Fred was known for his fiery temper. He was easily angered and often took out his frustration on his employees. Many feared him, though some tried to understand him. They sympathized with his loss, knowing that grief had shaped him. Despite his harsh demeanor, they did not see him as a bad person. They recognized his kindness, especially in the way he gave ex-convicts and other marginalized individuals a chance when no one else would. He extended a helping hand to those society had forgotten, offering them a fresh start.
An autopsy revealed that he had been shot 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the head. Forensic technicians found 2 shell casings on the floor and retrieved a bullet from the ceiling. This evidence helped them determine that 2 different weapons had been used.
That also meant there could have been 2 perpetrators. The team believed they had searched every inch of the house for the murder weapon, to no avail. As mentioned, the living room had been ransacked. Furniture was overturned, and its contents lay scattered across the floor. While examining the belongings the deceased had on him in his final moments, investigators noticed a key detail. The man wore a chain, but the most important piece was missing, a pocket watch. It appeared to have been snapped off in a hurry. Officers questioned the widow about the missing item. Dolly explained that several years earlier, she had gifted her husband a diamond-set watch for an important occasion. Fred rarely parted with it. She was certain that on the evening of the party, he had been wearing it. Investigators concluded that the watch must have been taken by the killer, leading them to suspect a robbery motive. However, a thorough search of the crime scene revealed that nothing else was missing. The house contained many valuables, some of which were lying on the floor, yet the perpetrator had ignored them. Even Fred's wallet, easily within reach, was left untouched. Law enforcement officers were left wondering, why had the killer taken only one item? A watch? Something about it didn't add up, but they couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Nevertheless, robbery remained the only motive that seemed plausible at the time, especially since Dolly had mentioned 2 previous attempted burglaries. She explained that her husband often complained about being awakened by strange noises at night. It was as if someone was trying to enter their house, or had even already made it inside. Each time Fred would check, but he never found anyone. However, it later came to light that various items had gone missing, including money and even food from the refrigerator. The officers searched for a logical explanation. They concluded that someone had likely broken in that evening, taking advantage of the couple's absence, probably the same person or people responsible for the previous incidents. But this time, the intruder hadn't expected Fred and Dolly to return when they did. It might have happened like this. When the Oesterreichs arrived home, Dolly went to the bedroom to put away her things. Meanwhile, Fred walked in on the intruders, catching them in the act. That's why he was killed. The thieves acted quickly and chaotically. They may have been skilled at robbing, but they had never taken a life before. That's why they only took the watch and spared his wife. They shoved her into the closet, not wanting another soul on their conscience. Since she hadn't seen their faces, she posed no threat to them. This version of events seemed plausible until the neighbors were questioned. Residents of Silver Lake claimed they had heard strange noises coming from the couple's home that night. Someone was arguing. Moments later, shots rang out. Then a woman, presumably Dolly, shouted Fred's name several times. One neighbor saw someone leaving through the back exit, moving like a shadow. Was it a man or a woman, young or old, someone familiar or a complete stranger? She had no idea. Most intriguingly, about 15 to 20 minutes later, all the lights in the mansion were turned off. This raised even more questions. Who could have done this? Had the perpetrator returned to the scene? If so, how did they manage to slip in unnoticed a second time? How many people were involved in the crime? Investigators decided to take a closer look at the wife. At first glance, Dolly appeared to be a devoted partner. Employees at the textile plant described her as kind and helpful, the complete opposite of her husband, who was known for being a bully. This led them to wonder, did Fred behave the same way at home? They dug deeper and discovered that the wealthy businessman struggled with alcoholism, a problem that began sometime after the death of his son. However, what was missing from the evidence was whether there had ever been any confirmed incidents of domestic violence. Dolly herself insisted that she and Fred had never argued, not even once. To investigators, this sounded implausible. After all, every marriage has disagreements, even minor ones. Yet, the German woman maintained that no such conflicts had ever occurred. Detectives also explored another possibility. Had Fred been unfaithful to his wife? But it turned out that Fred had devoted most of his life to work. Moreover, due to his coarse nature, he never attracted much attention from the opposite sex. Everything suggested that Dolly had also remained faithful to him. Investigators crossed another lead off their list. Disappointed, they felt as if they were wandering in the dark. Hoping to uncover something significant, they turned their attention to Fred's business. They analyzed the financial records, searching for irregularities, but everything suggested that Fred had been running his business honestly. With that avenue exhausted, they shifted their focus to a different lead, one still connected to the factory. When they learned that Fred frequently hired ex-convicts, it raised red flags. One former employee in particular stood out as a potential threat. Edward Flume had once worked at Fred's factory in Milwaukee. He had an extensive criminal record. Despite this, Fred and Dolly had extended a helping hand, even welcoming him into their home. But Flume squandered the opportunity and ended up back in prison. While serving his sentence, he wrote threatening letters to his former employer. The exact nature of those threats remains unknown today, but it was clear that Ed may have had a motive to harm Fred. Investigators attempted to track him down for questioning, but he had vanished without a trace. Several months passed, and law enforcement officers had no new leads. They kept reviewing the evidence they had already gathered, but didn't know where to go next. The breakthrough came in a completely unexpected way. Initially, Dolly was a suspect, but no charges had been filed against her. When officers found her, she had been locked inside the closet. Since the door could only be locked from the outside, it was impossible for her to have trapped herself inside. Police conducted an experiment to confirm this, proving that someone else had to have locked her in, which definitively ruled out the possibility that she was the one who shot her husband. Even though she was only a person of interest, she hired a lawyer just in case. One day, during a meeting with police officers, Herman Shapiro, her attorney, checked the time.
He took a watch out of his jacket pocket. The item immediately caught their attention. It was set with diamonds and had features identical to the one stolen from the crime scene.
It could have been a mere coincidence, but the investigator decided to ask. That's when he learned from Shapiro that he had received the watch from his client, with whom he was in a relationship. They had been having an affair for some time. This revelation was shocking. First, Dolly had initially claimed that the watch had been stolen. Second, she had entered a new relationship shortly after losing her husband. The detective questioned her again. She admitted that she had found the missing watch sometime earlier, hidden behind the couch cushions. She hadn't considered it important, so she never reported it to the police. Instead, she gave it to her lawyer, with whom she admitted she had been romantically involved. She did not deny any of it. The investigator, however, wasn't convinced. He had a bad feeling about her from the start. He believed she was hiding something and had played a role in the murder. Until now, though, he couldn't rationally explain how. She had been locked in the closet, which meant she must have had an accomplice, and it could have been her lawyer. That would explain a lot. Police investigated this lead, but it turned out that the couple had only met sometime after the crime was committed. This ruled out the possibility that they had planned and carried it out together. Shortly afterward, another shocking revelation emerged. A man named Roy Clamp walked into the Los Angeles police station, claiming to be an old friend of Fred and Dolly. He explained that they had first met back in Milwaukee, but after Fred's death, he and Dolly had grown much closer. They had a brief affair, during which the woman completely wrapped him around her finger. Then one day she asked him for a favor, one he couldn't refuse. He would do anything for her. So when Dolly handed him a suspicious package and told him to get rid of it, he didn't hesitate. Inside, he discovered a gun. He chose a swamp on the outskirts of Los Angeles as the place to dispose of it. At first, he didn't consider reporting the matter to the police, but over time, fear crept in. He worried that someone might eventually find the weapon and link it to him. Suspecting that the gun had been used in the murder of his friend, he decided to clear himself of any suspicion and went to the police station. He led investigators to a specific location, and when the team searched the area, they quickly recovered the gun. Careful analysis confirmed that it was one of the murder weapons. However, Roy had a solid alibi for the night of August 22, 1922, ruling out any involvement in the crime. The same was true for one of the Oesterreich's neighbors, who also fell under Dolly's spell. She convinced him to bury another gun in his garden, telling him that it reminded her too much of her late husband and that she didn't want it in the house.
Although many unanswered questions remained in the investigation, Dolly was arrested in July 1923 on suspicion of murdering her husband. Officers searched for direct evidence to prove her guilt, but found nothing. By January 1925, they were forced to drop the case, and the widow was officially cleared as a suspect.
"5 years passed, and the officers had lost hope of ever solving the case. Then, unexpectedly, Shapiro appeared in the chief detective's office. He had previously played a role in a major breakthrough, but it wasn't until February 1930 that he dropped a real bombshell. To the investigator, the new testimony sounded like something straight out of an Agatha Christie novel, far too surreal to be true. He couldn't believe that he or any of the other officers had overlooked something so significant. It seemed impossible, and yet it had happened. Shapiro admitted that he had withheld crucial information from the police. While Dolly was in custody, she had asked him to do some shopping and bring the groceries to her house. He was confused. After all, no one else lived there. That's when she confessed that someone was living in the attic, her half-brother, a vagabond. Shapiro was immediately suspicious. He wondered why he had never heard of this so-called brother before, and, more importantly, why the man was living in the attic when there were plenty of spare bedrooms in the house. Dolly refused to explain further. Instead, she gave Shapiro specific instructions on how to deliver the food. He was to rub his fingernails 3 times on the attic door. This was the signal for her so-called brother to open it. The request seemed bizarre, but the lawyer decided to go along with it, especially since Dolly appeared deeply concerned for her supposed family member. When the attic door finally opened, Shapiro was met by a much younger man, thin, frail, and so hungry that he practically threw himself at the food. Seizing the moment, the lawyer asked him some questions. The man introduced himself as Otto and made a shocking confession. He was not Dolly's half-brother, but her lover. For the past 8 years, he had been living hidden in the attic of the Los Angeles mansion. Before that, he had spent 7 years in an attic in Milwaukee. Otto Sanhuber had grown up in an orphanage, abandoned by his parents shortly after birth. When he met Dolly, he was just 16 or 17. She, on the other hand, was over 30. At the time, Otto worked in a factory owned by Fred. He repaired sewing machines, and his handsome appearance quickly caught the attention of Dolly, who had grown bored with her husband. After the loss of their son, her marriage to Fred had become little more than an arrangement on paper. They barely shared a bed anymore. One day, under the pretext of needing a sewing machine repaired, she invited Otto to her home. The moment he stepped inside, she began seducing him. Moments later, they ended up in bed. It was their first time together, but far from their last. From that day on, Dolly found frequent excuses to bring Otto over, and each time, their affair deepened. Eventually, she proposed something even bolder. She suggested that he quit his job and move into their home. She reasoned that it would save them time, allow her to have a lover constantly at her disposal, and ensure that Otto never had to worry about money, food, or a roof over his head. The boy, who had no one and nothing, eagerly agreed. He liked Dolly. She was the only person who cared about him, becoming both his lover and a motherly figure. When Fred left for work, Otto would emerge from the attic, spending much of his time in the couple's bedroom. By his own admission to the lawyer, Dolly demanded that they have sex up to 8 or even 10 times a day. Over time, he took on the role of a domestic servant, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, and fulfilling every request his mistress made. She placed the burden of household duties entirely on his shoulders, but he never complained. When the couple decided to move to Los Angeles, Dolly refused to give up the affair. Fortunately for her, the mansion they acquired had a loft. Otto became its first tenant, arriving there before the Oesterreichs officially moved in. Fred, completely unaware, never suspected a thing, or if he did, he may have only discovered the truth in the final moments of his life. Undoubtedly, he had sensed that something was amiss. His wife's own testimony hinted at this. Shortly before his death, Fred had complained that food was disappearing from their refrigerator, and money and small items were vanishing from drawers. The mysterious attic tenant was to blame. Though Otto rarely left the house, he would sometimes sneak out in the evenings when the couple went out or in the dead of night. Yet, no matter what, he always returned. He remained fiercely devoted to Dolly, spending most of his days hidden away, reading books. He loved science fiction, and Dolly encouraged his passion by providing him with paper and writing materials. allowing him to create his own stories. Several neighbors occasionally saw him lingering around the house or going inside. Whenever questions arose, Dolly explained that he was her half-brother, a story she only told when Fred was not around. During his interview with the lawyer, Otto revealed that there had indeed been an attempted break-in at the house. Aware of where the Oesterreichs kept their guns, he had taken 2 of them to the attic, reasoning that he might one day need to use them to protect his mistress. On the night of August 22, 1922, Dolly and Fred got into a heated argument, one that erupted shortly after they returned home from a party.
Screams echoed through the living room, reaching all the way up to the attic. Hearing the commotion, Otto hurried downstairs carrying both pistols. As he stepped into the room, he saw Dolly lying on the floor, while Fred stood over her, shouting in a fit of rage.
So Otto reacted. He couldn't let Fred hurt Dolly. Within moments, a struggle broke out between the 2 men. In the chaos, Otto accidentally pulled the trigger. Once, then again, and again. Dolly screamed, calling out her husband's name, frozen in shock. When she and Otto realized Fred was dead, they began to panic, frantically discussing what to do next. Otto suggested staging the scene to look like a robbery. He overturned furniture, emptied drawers, and scattered their contents across the floor. Dolly came up with the idea of stealing Fred's watch to reinforce the illusion. Otto took it, keeping it safe for the time being. Then, he locked Dolly in the closet. Afterward, he briefly stepped outside before returning, turning off all the lights in the house and retreating to his attic hideaway. Dolly never once suggested that Otto leave. Part of it was likely fear. She must have realized that if a young man suddenly moved in with her, it would attract police attention. But the lawyer believed there was more to it. He was convinced that Dolly never intended to reveal her relationship with Otto at all. Having a secret lover hidden away in her house suited her just fine. That was the story Shapiro told. The investigator initially refused to believe it, but one fact gnawed at him. Neither he nor any of the other officers had ever searched the attic. Why not? No one could answer that question. Shapiro added his own opinion. He believed Otto's version of events. Shapiro admitted that he had helped Otto escape. The lover left the United States and, as far as anyone knew, had managed to rebuild his life. Police began verifying the facts, and it turned out that Otto was real. He had settled in Canada, started a family, and tried to erase both Dolly and the 15 years he had spent hidden in the attic from his memory. He had even changed his name. When law enforcement finally tracked him down and questioned him, he confirmed the entire story. Dolly maintained that Otto had saved her from her husband's wrath. He was arrested but charged not with murder, but with manslaughter. Though found guilty, he avoided prison. The crime was already time-barred. That was likely the reason Shapiro had waited so long to tell the truth. Even though he had cut ties with Dolly long ago, he had protected her and Otto. He believed the man had already endured enough in his life. Otto was not a born killer, nor did he pose a threat to anyone. The case quickly gained media attention. As expected, Dolly was branded a femme fatale, while Otto became infamous as the man-bat. Dolly avoided any charges. According to the prosecutor's office, there was no legal basis to indict her. She had cheated on her husband and manipulated men, but that wasn't a crime. Not long after, she found another lover with whom she remained in a relationship for 30 years. They finally married in 1961, but just 2 weeks later the bride passed away. Whether she had ever maintained contact with Otto remains unknown. As for her former lover, Otto eventually returned to Los Angeles, where he lived out the rest of his days. He died in 1948. Dark File. Deadly good stories.